Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Again, I would like to start by thanking the EMRO, so the Mediterranean Regional Office of the World Health Organization, for giving me and giving us as an organization the opportunity to be with you today and to contribute to your meetings. I guess I will be probably building on what Dr. Sana has presented already, and I'm going to be using some examples of data and the importance of the data in supporting decision making. And I'm going to be focusing primarily on occurrence data, so توازن الملوثات في الغذاء, so the food occurrence data, and also the food consumption. I'm just going to see if this... I don't need actually to make this demonstration to you. You know the importance of food safety, and you know that when you make a decision on food safety, not only does it impact the health of the consumers that you're trying to protect, but it also impacts several economic sectors, primarily the agriculture sector. And you know that in the Eastern Mediterranean region, this is a huge contributor to the economies, but also the trade agenda. I don't know how many of you, probably when you make a decision, when you make a regulatory decision, another country will ask you why and how you made that decision. And they will be asking you for the information, the analysis, the data. So everybody has to be equipped with the capacity to produce the data, to analyze it and to use it for decision making. But we know that this is something that takes a long time in terms of building capacity. We need to build capacity to support that. Capacities mean we need expertise, so we need experts. We need the data itself, and we need the tools that will support the use of the data. And that generally takes time and takes money. And we, in a lot of instances, don't have the luxury to wait, so that's why we need to collaborate and work together and leverage initiatives. And in fact, it was one of the drivers why our organization, the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, was founded. We considered that there is a specific area of food science that we call food regulatory science that was not covered by some support, and we worked with a number of colleagues, regulators and former regulators and academia to create the organization. So allow me a minute to introduce what GFoRSS is.
The Global Food Regulatory Science Society. GFoRSS mission includes knowledge generation and dissemination, underpinning food regulatory decisions, in support of food control systems. Consistent reliance on food regulatory sciences enables robust food control programs.
I would like to mention that we are also an organization affiliate or a disciplinary group of the International Union of Food Science and Technology. You may have heard of IOFOST. IOFOST is the global voice of food science and technology. In fact, it is the only representative of food science and technology recognized by the International Science Council, which is essentially a UN council. So GFoRSS, in fact, was identified last year at the Singapore IFOS meeting as the disciplinary group for regulatory science. Now, we all are familiar, I hope, with this schematic. This schematics was adopted in 1995 by the Codex Alimentaris Commission as the foundation of the decision-making process. Dr. Sana mentioned it. Risk analysis is
the foundation, the decision-making process upon which food safety and nutrition decisions need to be made. And in risk analysis, you have the bubble of risk assessment, which is the component that is primarily based on science, evidence, and data. Now, we've heard actually some of the colleagues ask questions about the components of risk assessment. In the components of the risk assessment, you have, of course, the elements of the hazard and the hazard characterization. So the impact of a hazard coming from food on human health. That impact, you can find the information about it in any type of international literature, and particularly the guidance that is provided by FAO, WHO, as mentioned, GFA, GEMRA, JNPR. Those are authoritative sources of information that can give you that hazard characterization. But when you're trying to make a decision for yourself as a country, you need to take the realities of the country, and the realities of your country may be different. By what they differ? They differ by the type of food that your population eats. Even within EMRO, in the western side of EMRO, you eat more couscous than in the eastern side of EMRO. You eat probably far more rice in the eastern side of EMRO than you eat rice in the western side of EMRO. So the type of food consumption information is key to characterize that. The other element is also what type of food and what type of contamination in your food, and that's based on your market. What is available to your consumer? So in order to make a decision that is relevant to you, you need to access that information, and those are the two key pieces of information that you need to rely upon. And by the way, when Codex tries to make a decision, so this is at the international standard setting level, and when GFA, for example, as an advisory body, makes that risk assessment, the first thing that GFA will do is will be making a call for data and asking countries to provide them with that information, because GFA is trying to make an assessment that is relevant for the globality of humanities. But at our level, at the country level, you need to have access to that. And sometimes that's not that easy. Now, I'm going to actually try to give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to try to keep this really short. So a couple of examples of how we can address the shortage of data, but also to show you what we can do potentially to work together in order to address these data gaps. So if I start with the occurrence data, how do you access occurrence data? Mostly through analytical information, picking up samples, realizing monitoring programs. For some countries, they may have a total diet study, and trying essentially to identify priority hazards, trying to determine the level of occurrence of those priority hazards. We know that that is not necessarily available for everybody. And while we want to have the information collected all together, what do we do if we don't have anything? And we wanted to make the demonstration that we could start building the capacity that will support gathering this occurrence data, and that's the initiative that we started on, enabling this data availability. We thought that the first thing that we could do is we could try to look at this published data. There are so many academic centers, even actually your own institutions, are doing some studies, and the information may be available in the scientific literature, and it could be accessed, and it could be a first support for that. The second element is, and we hope we will convince you to access that, is that you may have a lot of data in the drawers of your own laboratories. I'm sure that collectively, we are sitting on thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of data points that are not exploited for the purposes of risk assessment and therefore decision making. So hopefully we're going to be making a plea to get access to that. And then later on, we need to plan the generation of data in a manner that is based on a prioritization, because we know this is not cheap. This is a costly proposition, so we need to prioritize to know where to invest in order to generate the data needed. So what we try to do is to try the experience if, let's see if we can collect enough data on some priority chemicals using published information. And in fact, this is an exercise that we started through a group that was developed in collaboration with the Global Food Regulatory Science Society. We started actually a systematic review looking at the scientific literature, identifying a priority hazard, setting the region. The region for us was 22 countries of the Arab region. So we chose essentially countries that are members of the League of Arab States. So those were our targets. And then we developed a process by which we do a systematic search of the literature. We develop selection criteria for the inclusion or the exclusion of the publications, because we need to be the data to be meaningful. So we are critical as to what we select and what we exclude. And then what we would like to do is to create a repository of this information in what we can call as a food occurrence database. Now, here, I know that we've had some discussions, and some of you might say, "Oh my God, another database! We are having enough of databases." Call it a database, call it a repository. Each country needs to have a systematic access in a very structured manner to occurrence information that is needed to be able to do the analysis that was mentioned, meaning to do the exposure assessment. So what we often would do, and everybody when you speak about databases, people say, "Oh my God, it's a lot of money, it's costly, it will take time, etc." So here we said, let's not reinvent the wheel. WHO and FAO WHO, let's say, run what we call the GEMS Food Program. That's a database. And that database is structured according to a certain way in the way the data is represented. So we said, why don't we try to mimic the way the GEMS Food Program is set up and try to extract the information in the same manner, and everybody can have their own GEMS. But that own GEMS, you can then use it and share it with others if you wish to share it with others. But at least you start creating something that is structured for your own use. So this is what we did. We basically developed a system in the form of an Excel sheet that contains all the fields that are known to be requested by the GEMS Food Program. And on the basis of that, we built a database that we actually call the Arab Food Occurrence Database. By the way, we built this for the Arab region, but it can be deployed in individual countries. We were lucky to receive the support from WHO. In fact, has believed in this activity and funded our efforts to develop this tool. And in fact, we used one Arab country to be, I guess, the pilot country, and that's essentially the Republic of Lebanon. So we built the Lebanese or the Lebanon Food Occurrence Database as a demonstrator of what this could be like. So you see, this is a demonstration of how the system or the interface would look like. I would like to mention also that the system that we built is meant to be bilingual. So you have it in both English and Arabic. And it is a system where the owner of the database will be able to control who uses the database. Because that's very important. You need also to preserve the integrity of the information that you generate. And this is an example of how it looks like. By the way, this is what we experimented. In fact, we launched this in Lebanon. But you have a user-protected system. So every user is defined. They can register. So the manager of the database can actually get access to a number of users. You have different features, a dashboard, analyticals, but you can also add the data either as an individual sample. So you have one single analysis and you would add, you can have the information about the year, the country, the type of contaminants, information on the sampling plan. But you can also do that in a more systematic approach. Let's say you have an Excel sheet. You can upload the Excel sheet using the same fields, and the whole information that you had will be inserted into the database. Now, the database contains the field that I mentioned, mirroring the GEMS food program. So we used, in fact, the WHO food identifier, the WHO food classification. We did them on purpose so as not to reinvent the wheel. But we went also all the way for those data that are extracted from publications, that the system would allow you even to store the reference of the publication, and you can click on that publication and you can have the information about that publication. So this is an example where you see the reference on iron, lead, cadmium, and tin from coated in tin plates in chickpeas. So that's an example of what you have. Also, it's a searchable system. So for example, here we type arsenic, and you do a search for arsenic, and you can actually set your fields of search. The system will search the database, and you can export the information for any type of use. So this is essentially what we talked about, is the use of the data analysis for exposure purposes or other purposes. Now, I'm going to show you an example of what we did, because it's nice to have data, but what is really nicer is to try to use it, and try to use it to estimate a risk. If you recall, last year, the Codex Alimentarius Commission adopted a standard for lead in honey. And one of the questions that we all had is, how is this standard actually for in comparison to food or to honey that is available in the Arab region? We have a region that, consumes honey. Honey is mentioned in the Quran. It's a very important food. It's known for its, nutritional value, for its benefits, and so on. So we thought, don't we start a project to look at the data, the occurrence of lead in honey, and try to look at the Arab region. So here, for full disclosure, I would like to give credit to my colleagues. So my colleagues from the Laval University, Géranie Théomier, Sylvia Dominguez, who worked on this. I would like also to give credit to both Dr. Amin Assouf and our colleague Joyce Haddad from Lebanon, who actually spearheaded and actually helped us pioneer the program of the food occurrence database. So what we did is, this is the type of information that we did here. We did not use information that you had, and we would love to have that. And you will see that, in fact, we need that. Just looking at the information that is published, we started with over 2,000 publications. So looking at the 22 countries, this is actually the phase of identification of the papers. We eliminated over 1,800 publications already, because either they were out of scope or they were duplicate records. And we screened about 303 studies that were included in the screening system. So in the screening system after that, we looked at eliminating some of the studies that did not fulfill the eligibility criteria. So for example, you have studies that did not report any positive sample. You have studies that did not report the characteristics of the analytical method. So for example, to have the LOQ, the LOD. If you cannot trust the method, you cannot trust the data. So that's why essentially we had this selection criteria, and we ended up with about 57 studies. So you see, from over 2,000, we have 57 studies that were selected. Now, of course, I'm going to steer you the entire process, and what we did is actually, not only did we look at the occurrence, but we tried to estimate the exposure. So the EDI, that's the estimated dietary intake. Estimated dietary intake in microgram per kilogram body weight per day for the different countries that were identified. And we even did a calculation of the margin of exposure, because as you know, lead is a non-threshold chemical. Okay, so basically, according to the latest evaluations by GFoRSS, any level of lead is likely to have an impact on human health, and particularly on the central nervous system, with an interest, for example, on the IQ. So we looked at calculating the margin of exposure for 3 types of endpoints: a nephrotoxicity endpoint, a cardiovascular endpoint, but also for children, and that's most important, a developmental endpoint. I look at what we found. So here, how to read these numbers. If you have any numbers in the MOE that is lower than 100, you should be moderately concerned. Okay? So I think actually you can see that we should be moderately, if not more, concerned for a number of countries if we account for this data. Now, of course, now this comes now to the point where Wise would say, the wisdom part. Okay, the wisdom part. We need to look at this data with a critical eye. Yes, this is informing us that in some countries of the Arab region, there may be a problem of exposure to lead from honey as a source of exposure. There may be. Now, a couple of critical considerations. The data is biased, totally biased. It's biased on what is published. We don't know what you have. We don't know how many non-detects you may have, because we try to do a probabilistic assessment in here. So this may be an overestimation of the risk, and maybe accessing the data that you have will give us a better information. On the other hand, when we tried to make this calculation, we made this estimation on the basis of consumption data that was limited. The consumption data that we had was based on a 2017 report by WHO that the average consumption of honey is 0.8 gram per day. 0.8 gram per day, that's really a little bit. For a high eater, I think some of us consume quite a bit more than 0.8 grams per day. And for frequent eaters, this might be an underestimation of the consumption. So, you see, we have to look at this. What this tells us simply is that, well, we need to have access to more accurate information around lead in honey to be able to estimate these margins of exposure, to actually more accurately characterize the risks, and for countries where there is a potential concern, to investigate the source. And probably, by the way, the source is environmental, or it's coming, countries that have lived tragic situations like a war would be expected to have in the environment a higher level of particles of lead, and therefore a potential for higher exposure from honey. Honey is a representation from the environment. Actually, bees get that from the environment. So that can be an explanation as to why some countries are showing a higher level of exposure and therefore a lower margin of exposure. But this brings me to the last point that I would like to make in this presentation. We cannot have a good exposure assessment and therefore a good decision-making for you as countries, including, by the way, to know if a Codex standard is adapted to your situation, unless also you have access to consumption information, food consumption information. And that's another level of investment. I know that several countries have already started on this, but what we would like to do as a community, as a scientific community, we would like to work on unifying the methodologies for food consumption data collection in the Arab region. We would like to leverage each other's efforts. Just to give you an idea, in Canada, when I had the privilege to read the Food Directorate, which is essentially the food safety and nutrition standard setting in Canada, we used to spend $3 million on food consumption data collection. $3 million. We could not do that every year. We did that once every 10 to 15 years, just to give you an idea. So we cannot afford to have this individually, alone, and at the same level of cost. We need to have methodologies that would allow us to still have the practical implementation of the collection of the data, but still to be affordable, reachable, and feasible. So here, I would like to invite you to a webinar that our organization will be holding on Thursday. I think it really will be over on Thursday, so we're not overstepping or overlapping. The meeting will be done now at that point.
That most of the participants
Will be live. Okay, well, sorry. So there will be flight, but
the luxury of having a record?
Yes. In fact, it's going to be, so it's a webinar. You can register, you can get access to it, but it's going to be also broadcast on YouTube. So it's going to be broadcast from Cairo at 10 a.m. It's a 1.5 hour of a webinar. In fact, you will have the privilege to have Dr. Stana with us as well. And you will have also the privilege to have one of the leading experts in the area of food consumption data collection, Dr. Maha Hotait from Lebanon. She worked actually, I understand, a lot with WHO in supporting this effort. And in fact, here, I would like to announce that we will be launching an expert working group for the Arab region that will be working on food consumption data collection. So here, I'm going to make a plea to you for collaboration in working together towards convergent methodologies, unifying the methods. And by the way, we worked on a review of food consumption data methods, the methodologies of data collection of food consumption. And we're going to be trying to make that available in Arabic, in French, and in English. So that review is practically over, and hopefully you will be able to look for it in our journal. Also looking at making available the tools. Any country who is interested in the food occurrence database, we are happy to share it with you, as long as actually we agree on its maintenance. It has been supported by WHO for a number of countries, and we may be seeking for more support from WHO for deploying it in other countries as well. See, this is my way of fundraising, like to show some outputs and then try to get a little bit more money. And what we are having as well, right now we are leveraging some support as well from the US Codex office through the funding provided to the Arab Codex initiative. Clear that if we do not have occurrence data and consumption information, countries cannot estimate the potential impact of proposed Codex standards on their own systems, on their own foods. So you need to be equipped with that type of information. And we're also relying on some funds that is also generated through the Trust Fund of Food Regulatory Science managed by Laval University. So looking forward to further collaborations with you. Very thankful to Dr. Eber Zain, to the entire WHO team for giving us the opportunity to be with you. I'm looking forward to continued collaboration. Thank you very much.